Morning, everyone. Welcome to today's forum, where Deacon Ben will be talking about his sabbatical experience. Just a couple of things to note. If you have a question or a commentary, please come up to the mic. I'll probably be here. I'll be looking out for you. It's mainly for our recording. Folks can't really hear very well if you make a comment from your seat. It's just the acoustics of the space. And that's it. I'm gonna now hand this over to Ben, Deacon Ben here, to continue on. Deacon?
All right, thank you so much. Man, I tell you what, I'm gone for 2 months and y'all get technologically savvy. That's fantastic. So, greetings, friends. Good morning. This is a rare opportunity for me to come up. I'm usually teaching confirmation class at this time. And so if I speak a little fast, do this for me, and then I'll slow it down a little bit. My teenagers like to talk fast. And so we are here to hear about my sabbatical, my 2-month sabbatical that back in March, the Congregation Council adopted a sabbatical policy for our rostered ministers in the congregation, and they granted me a 2-month sabbatical to pause, reflect, and to recharge. And so what's on the screen here is just going to be pictures of my sabbatical. You'll see pictures of like my family. You'll see pictures of the trips that I've been on. Towards the tail end, you'll see the picture of the books I've read. And then afterwards, you're invited to go to the table that's in the front if you want to peruse through those books and see exactly like what I might have highlighted or what I might have underlined. I am a student of the doodling class, and so most of my notes I highlight in my books and I don't write on paper. So it's always fun for that time. So I'm going to do my best to make sure it's not me talking for the next 45 minutes, but I really want to hear from y'all what questions you might have or even reflecting on this experience together as we do this together, because in the history of Christ the King, I think sabbaticals have been granted in the past, but it wasn't as such a formalized as we have done now. And so that is in part first to help us recognize that sabbaticals are important for the ministry of our ministers of the church. We hear these reflections in scripture about the importance of rest and praise, a Sabbath, where we hear in Genesis 2, God rested on the work of creation. And the 10 Commandments and how God tells Moses that you are to take a Sabbath as a day of reflection on the blessings that God has given you, and a release from the bondage of slavery. And Deuteronomy 15 describes a period of after 7 years in which people are released from all their debts. That would be fantastic for all those that have a college and educational debt. But reflecting on this Sabbath is really for the health, the welfare of God's people. Jesus pulls Jesus himself away from the crowds to reflect and praise, goes into the wilderness for 40 days to begin his ministry. And so it is important for us to recognize that Sabbath is essential for ministry. And sabbaticals, I don't think, are anything new. I know a lot of other organizations and teachers, professors have that opportunity to give their leaders that opportunity to pause and break. So the purpose of this sabbatical is that I rested, that I renewed, and then I actually got to have some education. And education being like firsthand of accounts, as you're seeing right now in the Holy Land. First accounts of walking along a different urban city in San Francisco, and education of all the books that I got to read, as a lot of those books just keep piling on. And when your children keep wanting to read The Giving Tree or Bernstein Bears, it's hard for you to really dive into your books that you collect. And so I got a chance to read all those books that were piling on. So as you can slowly start seeing, the first part of that is our Holy Land trip, in which we joined with Pastor David Hansen in Spirit of Joy Lutheran Church, and also a church in North Dakota. And I apologize that I don't remember their name, but they were very loud and said that it was too hot. And I just kind of laughed to myself as a Texan. I'm like, okay. Anyway, so we went to the Holy Land, and this was done through Elias Tours, in which basically is called the footsteps of Jesus. And so wherever we went in the Holy Land was the best guess idea of where Jesus is. You know, you can always go to these different sites and go, did Jesus really walk here? Did Jesus really get born right here at this spot? It is a best guess situation. These are spots and places all through the Holy Land in which is recognized as the place where Jesus fed the 5,000, where Jesus called the disciples, where Jesus after rising from the dead, says, "Feed my sheep" to Peter. So we got to experience all these different sights, sounds, and the culture of this area, which was beautifully done. And so we went to all these different sites. We flew through Tel Aviv, and we basically crossed the Holy Land. So we went to different sites such as Mount Carmel, where Elijah challenged the priests of Baal. We went to Nazareth, and we got to see where Elizabeth and Mary interacted in talking about Jesus being born and John jumping for joy in the womb. We went to Cana, in which the first miracle of our Lord and Savior turned water into wine. The next day, we went to Mount Arbel, where Jesus oftentimes went on a mountain and taught with his disciples. We went to Caesarea Philippi, in which, oh my gosh, the waters there at Caesarea Philippi, crystal clear. One of the temptations I almost had was to jump in until I saw somebody with a rather large machine gun, and so I backed away from the waters there and did not jump in. Then we went to Galilee, in which we got to go on a boat ride into the Sea of Galilee. We got to see the boat that was discovered in 1986. That is a 2,000-year-old boat that they believe was very reminiscent of what Jesus's time and the people used for fishing. So that was kind of cool to see that. We went to the Mount of Beatitudes, in which is a monastery there that is believed where Jesus taught the Beatitudes. And I'm not going to read everything on this handout, but you'll see that these are all the different sites we went to. We went to the Mount of Olives, and we got to walk almost the Palm Sunday to Easter story of Jesus. And so that was fun to kind of experience that very subtle, very calming, and also a humbling experience. The next day, we actually went to the Judean desert, in which many of y'all heard this joke before, but it was cooler in the Judean desert than it was in Houston. When we were in the Judean desert, it was 95 degrees. I checked that day. It was 108 in Houston before the heat index. So you got a claim to fame to say you were hotter than the desert in Jerusalem. We went to the Jordan River, in which we got to see where Jesus was baptized, and we got to reaffirm our baptismal promises there. We got to go to Jericho, the oldest continuously occupied city in the world. We got to float in the Dead Sea, which is it's an experience. I started getting all tingly afterwards, so I only stayed in for like 15 minutes. The salt content is pretty intense. Then we went to the Temple Mount, which was fascinating. I always thought growing up that the Jerusalem and the temple, where King Solomon's temple, was supposed to belong to the Jewish people. And now, as you might know, it is under Muslim rule. And so it was interesting to kind of walk amongst that and the different areas and the different places that I got to go to as a Christian and as a American, and I hate to say it, also as a white straight male. It was a unique and eye-opening experience in those things that I saw. Then we got to do the Via Dolorosa the next day, in which we got to walk in the last footsteps of Jesus until we went to the Church of the Resurrection and visited our friends at Lutheran Redeemer, which is right down the street from the church. And then we had a big celebration dinner that evening, and then we returned back on the 19th, in which to fly through Tel Aviv, be prepared for an hour and a half of security, and know your parents' history, because that's what they quizzed me on: where my grandparents were from, how they met, what's their name, the security. Yes, but it's an understanding that people will go to these holy lands and these sites, taking artifacts and taking them back with them to their homelands. And so they are very conscious of that and want to make sure that we're here for the right reasons. So our friends that have gone to the Holy Land with Pastor Dwayne Larson know this. Our friends that if we do another trip, it's a better preparation because I was sitting there like doing this on my watch, and the security officer kind of just looked at me and was just like looking at me like it ain't gonna happen. Questions first. So that was my first big trip, was to the Holy Land. And then my wife, Lindsay, we took a time for us to have a little vacation. Don't feel bad about the kids because we got to spend some time at the lake with their noni. And so, first of all, my noni, my mother, Asher and Mara's grandma, always loves this time, a sacred time with grandparents. And if you're a grandparent, you know this time with your grandkids is important. So we actually went to San Francisco and just drove down the coast. We discovered I have a fear of heights when I'm right next to the coast because I was gripping the bar here and Lindsay was just laughing as I was gripping it closer and closer. And I'm just, yeah, because I just don't like the heights of all the way down the coast. But we went to San Francisco, we went to Santa Cruz, we went to Monterey, we went to Big Sur, Paso Robles, and then not a part of the original agenda, we looked at each other and we thought it was silly not to go to Disneyland for a day. And so we broke off for the day in which we were going to see all these like museums and wonderful sites, but Lindsay and I decided we needed to be at Disneyland and enjoy our time without our kids, which is an interesting experience altogether. Something like, oh yeah. So other things that we did, as you know, I am passionate about floating rivers. And so Lindsay and I and our son, Asher and Mara, went to New Braunfels for 3 days and floated the river. Nothing cools you off than 74-degree water. And so my son, Asher, for the first time, went down the chutes and did this at the end. A wonderful trip, a day of rest. And then towards the end of my sabbatical, we did a trip to the Texas Windish Museum in Giddings. And so if you're not familiar with Windish, it is a heritage, depending on where you read, it's like a southern part of Germany, Yugoslavia. The Texas Wind is where my heritage came from, and which is a funny story because it was last year my godfather decided to take a DNA 23 test, and we always had this word German. We are 68% German. We are proud heritage, and we came here in 1836, and well, the DNA test came back discovering that we are Slavic and we are Windish, and going, oh dear, what does that mean? Am I really truly German? And it was funny to actually realize the history of the Texas winds, and yeah, and knowing that in Texas we have the largest Texas wind museum in the country, and it was interesting to go in there and hearing about the history of wanting to come to the States to practice their own form of Lutheranism, and then they came to Texas. They had a number of hardships of yellow fever, and then they basically came to Sealy and they found themselves broke, and so they had to settle in Texas, and then they kind of just spread it. Yeah, so again, you can all look this up on Google, and it's fascinating history, and history I didn't even know about and got to really dive into thanks to the sabbatical. And now my children get to hear it over and over again, and Lindsay gets to smile because she's 38% German, so she's more German than me. And then anyways, all the reading we did. So I had 12 books that I decided to read on, and all of them are in the back, so later you can peruse through them, look at them, all that fun jazz. But a lot of the cool books that have just been piling on, a lot of fascinating things. So there was one book called The State of Youth Ministry, in which that was done by the Barna Report, and they looked at Protestantism in the United States and the state of youth ministry. And that was in 2016. Now we're in 2023, and now we're in post-pandemic. And so now I got to have the opportunity to read The State of Religion and Young People's Mental Health. And this was basically on the mental health of our youth at the end of 2022. And there were some interesting findings in that, in which we can talk a little bit about that if we want to. But it basically says the most important thing that our leaders in faith need to know is the mental health is on the rise, and the church is a perfect place to meet our young people and our families in that. And how we do that, we should talk and figuring that out in the future. And that is a future of our church, particularly because we are a healing place. We are a spiritual home, or becoming a spiritual home. And so that is a future in our ministry together, dear friends, is the mental health of our young people. Then I read some ones that I haven't read since my days in seminary, my days that as some of y'all might know, I had to do a Master's of Arts program as part of my associate in ministry. So I wrote a 124-page on youth ministry model based off of the X-Men comic book series. And so I got to dip in a little bit of theology in that. And so I read a couple of books based off of the Marvel Universe, comics and the sacred text, and how comics are a means of God's divinity to be revealed to us in this day and age. Then I read the very first academic findings called The Sacred Playground, in which they basically take summer camp experiences and actually have scientific results on what effects that summer camps have on young people. And then there's all these different youth ministry books I read. I even read a popular series called The Crazy Talk, Stories That Jesus Told, in which is a podcast that's based off of all of Jesus' parables and the importance of sharing stories. And then I even got to read A Year of Biblical Living, One Man's Humble Quest to Follow the Bible. So this is by A.J. Jacobs, in which I didn't know that this was a well-known author, that he wrote his first book on what it was like to read the whole encyclopedia, the whole entire Britannica encyclopedia. Thank you. He read the whole entire of that book, and then this gentleman decided, I'm going to read the Bible and literally follow all the 613 holy codes that Bible has in there. And it talks about this journey in that experience. And then the last book that I got to read was Made, Known, Loved, and it's developing an LGBTQ inclusive youth ministry. As we have now become RIC, it's time for us to kind of reevaluate how we are being inclusive to our young people of all different backgrounds. And this book gave us fantastic different resources and an interesting calendar on which we should focus on, like when we can uplift our LGBTQ communities. Then in my last week's sermon, I told you I did adult projects. And some of y'all might have wondered, what adult projects did you do? So I digitized photos. My father passed away in 2012, and so there was about 60 years, I'm going to say 40 years, because I don't know if he started taking photos when he was born in 1948 as a baby. But I got to digitize all 13,000 of his photos on a digital drive. I discovered all my taxes that I filled and the taxes my mother did when I was a child, and I digitized all those. So that was kind of fun I say fun because it was fun to look at like what it was like to fill taxes out for a 3-year-old, and then what it's like to fill it out for a teen, and then what it's like to fill it out for a college student. But I got to fill those out. I got to digitize them just because in case of a fire, I don't want to lose those important documents. As our archives team always tells me, make sure you have backups on all these important documents. And so because of the sabbatical and this extra time, I got to do that. I got to really get us safe from emergencies and having all that information backed up. I got to remodel the yard, and that was fun during the Texas heat. I got to do a lot of projects with the kids. So Asher caught his very first fish in our pond. I posted a photo of that maybe 2 or 3 weeks back, and he didn't want to reel it in. He was so excited he caught it, and then he goes, okay, I don't want it. He drops the rod. So he got to catch his first fish. We got to do a lot of reading of books. Mom just recently brought back all my Barnaby Boys books, and so I'll get to start reading those to our children. Harry Potter, I get to start finally reading those to my children in this time, and so it was a blast. And one of the most important things we got to do is eating at our table together as a family. The importance of coming together, sharing a meal, talking about our days, praying for each other. And then more importantly, just being in the moment. This the hugest thing I could take out of the sabbatical is the importance of being in the moment with people. So that's my sabbatical. I've talked for about 25 minutes. I can talk more, but I want to hear from you. What questions might you have?
Sounds like you need a vacation.
Well, it's funny you say that, Beverly, because people come up to me and go, well, I hope you're well rested and ready to go. And I go, well, if you ever have a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old, Yeah, I don't know if you're ever well rested. But it was fun. Sounds like a vacation from a vacation, but no, it was a fun experience of doing this. And I guess the other thing from my young people, they appreciated this. I got to complete the new Zelda Tears of the Kingdom on Nintendo Switch, in 100+ hour game that takes up our young people's lives. So I got to beat that during my sabbatical. So that temptation is off the table during my work. So, and thank you for the laughter. Appreciate that. Other questions, my chief? Go for it.
Tell us a little bit more about the reading you did. There's a ton of really interesting books. I'm fascinated by the comic and theology connection here. Can you talk a little bit about comics as sacred texts and
Yeah, so that book was interesting, and you can tell. So my initial PowerPoint that I was going to present you all was right here. It was about a 220 slide presentation with all my notes, but I figured this was more enjoyable for y'all than that. But from that book, it basically takes different articles from religious professors, and they've taken all these different comics and which ones actually talking about exactly how we see the sacred in comics, how you see the divine. And a lot of them talked about how the Hebrew language actually contributes to the graphic novel, how it actually influences the art, especially with I forget his name right now, and I wrote that down in my notes. Will Eisner, talking about how Will Eisner took a lot of his inspiration from the Hebrew text in order to write a lot of his comics, and now he's referred to as the master comic storyteller. And he actually wrote a graphic novel called A Contract of God, which is between a rabbi and God, and it's almost a parallel to the Job story, and talking about his journey and his faith and how that contributes to that. It's a lot of, also, they did a lot of interesting studies on different comic books that are outside of the popular norms, and talking about how art can actually influence the text and how the text influences the art. And so that's fascinating to thinking about as we think of our context and how art can be used in order to help us with our liturgy, help us in telling God's story to God's people. As many of us know that, in the times of Luther, in the times of the Middle Ages, there were basically the only way they can see visual representation of the scriptures is their stained glass windows. And so how do we continue to use that as a way of proclaiming God's story to God's people, and how God's people can relate to this? Did that answer your question? I guess it's like all over the place. And that text, to be honest, was all over the place with these 18 different articles, but it was fascinating reading this to hear people's stories and their interpretations.
Can you give us an example of sacred and comic situations?
So an opportunity for the sacred in a comic. So there is a comic called The Midnight Nation. And I always butcher this person's last name, and since we're recording, I'm not going to butcher it online. But what in this moment, it basically talks about a gentleman that in his journey as he is trying to find redemption, he comes to the end point of his journey, and he relives all of his past sins. And in that moment, then he is given forgiveness of all that. And so in the comics and sacred text, I would say that is an opportunity for young people to realize where are there moments in their life in which they are giving that forgiveness from other people. And sometimes for people, it's easier to pick up a comic book with so much graphic imagery and beautiful pictures than it is to pick up the Bible that has absolutely no pictures in it most of the time. And so what they're talking about is in a moment where the art and the words connect to the divine in yourself. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. I was wondering, did they talk about the sacred in some like well-known Marvin?
Well, there was a lot of that in the Marvel theology in the universe, and so they talked a lot about that, and talking about in Spider-Man's weakness, he oftentimes have to rely on something outside of his powers and his gifts in order to help other people. You know, sometimes we think that we can do things all on our own, but the importance of how we need to work, how we need to depend on others and finding strength in others. So there was a book on that. It's not in this one, but it's the Theology in the Marvel Universe. And it talks a lot about Jessica Jones and talking about the feminism movement and talking about how this is like a model that is self-sacrificing and self-preservation and those dualities between those two. And so, yes. So yeah, there was a book that definitely touched on the bigger things that people have seen and experienced and read, but yeah.
With respect to the comment and the drawing, if you're not familiar with particular works cited,
Yeah.
there should be an interest in understanding.
So I will tell you, like the theology in the Marvel Universe, yes. The sacred and comics, the sacred narratives, that one was very academically heavy, which for some, that's not a problem. For me, it was kind of like I had to kind of pause, digest, and then reread it again. And so, yeah, so those texts back there are definitely all the different levels to understand. And all these works actually kind of go into a little bit of history with those comics and how they came to be and the character development and all that stuff. Oh, I have Zoom. Oh, okay, I'm doing it. I'm happy to do that.
We'll just ask are there any questions from Zoom land? You can just unmute yourself and ask.
Right, yeah.
So, on to read something that's from all time that I still not ready. I'm intrigued to get your perspective on that. Your recommend, don't recommend.
I recommend. It was a fun book. I mean, this person literally took all the holy codes of Leviticus and Deuteronomy, and he basically took a year. He spent 8 months really following the Old Testament, and then 4 months following New Testament. It's fascinating to read because there's so many things that people, as he describes, there's cafeteria theology. People take and pick what they want and how it lives in their life. And so, can a person actually live the whole entire Bible? I don't know if you want me to spoil it for you or not, but in the book, he kind of describes like his realization, and that the fact of the matter is that he comes out of the experience. So he starts as an agnostic, and then he's a reverent agnostic. So he discovers in his journey the importance of Sabbath, the importance of how prayer changed him and his wife's life. And then it talked about the importance of community, a feeling of belonging to the place. And so he still continues to be this reverent agnostic, but appreciates how spirituality can help ground a person and not be lost in the secular and all the busyness and the crazy schedules and stuff like that. And of course, during this journey, he has a kid, which oftentimes in this journey, he has a child, and that can obviously impact a person's journey and impact their goals and what they want to do. And in particular, the funny one that he describes, and he writes his reflections and his interviews in the book, but he talks about the one that he struggled with is whenever a woman is on that time of the month, he is not to touch the woman at all. And so his wife did not appreciate that for a full week of literally not holding hands, of literally not being in the same room, literally not sitting in the same chair. And so his wife decided it would be just the funniest thing to sit in every chair in the house. And so sometimes he had to sit on the floor for weeks on end because she was sitting on every chair. So, yeah.
A huge A.J. Jacobs fan. He also has written Drop Dead Healthy, and he
Yes.
investigates all of it. He's funny, and his poor suffering wife. I mean, she puts up with all of this. You've got to read it.
Yeah. All right, go for it.
So I was at Church of the Sabbatical.
Yeah.
Did you actually walk through the middle of
We did. So the
it? And do you think that's where Jesus was?
where he was crucified, there's a picture of him where there's like a stone, and people were kind of giving reverence. That's to believe that's where they laid Jesus off the cross. And then maybe like 50 feet is the tomb of Jesus, and that's like this big building that has like all that's adorned, into which you enter in, and then all of a sudden there is a priest there who doesn't speak English, but his only English he knows is no photos. And then so when I took a photo, he goes, no photos, and I go, oh, I'm so sorry. I'll like tell the other group, and he's like, no English. Like, so. Yeah, but oh my gosh, the reverence of being in there. It was nice, first of all, that the line was only 45 minutes versus some places, sometimes of the year when it's holy days. I mean, it can take hours upon hours and people are waiting in line. And I have to laugh that there was a person that asked, was it worth it? While I was in the line asked to go there and see the tomb. And, we just kind of said, well, yeah, of course it's worth it. That's why we're here. I think he goes, oh, okay. And then he got it. It's always fun to hear from people being in there. But yeah, I got to also touch the Rock of Calvary. We got to take pictures in front of it. It was really cool. It was a unique, humbling experience. A lot of the journey in the Holy Land was in silence, just because you take into the fact that this is a possibility where our Lord and Savior walked. And it's reverence not only with us as Christians, but with the Muslim community and the Jewish community there. It was really cool to see how interfaith is doing pretty okay. And of course, there's a lot of issues that we know about that's going on there, but there is a reverence to each other and a respect to each other as church leaders. So it was fun. It was good. I guess the shock of that is that actually Christianity in the Holy Land is dying in their reference. We were led by a Christian Palestinian named Hammy, and he was saying that in that area, the Jewish community is declining and the Christianity families are dying. So if we're talking about a Christian presence there, it's something that we have to work on because it's dying, literally dying. People are not. What do we say in the Lutheran Church? People are not making babies fast enough, but no, it's just that the faith is not spreading enough there. And so a lot of the Christian households are now being taken over either by secular families or by Muslim families. And Muslims are described as basically it's a steady. So they're not, so nobody is really growing, but it's just either steady, decline, or dead. And that's the reality we live in. Yes.
Next slide.
Yeah. So the church in Nazareth, in which this is the church in which Mary came to Elizabeth and said, I'm pregnant, and then the baby leaps for joy. So in the Crusades, a lot of times when they discovered a popular Christian site, their answer was, let's build a church. And so that is one of the murals that they had. In its 500th anniversary, they asked all these different nations to create a mosaic of our Mary. And they basically presented them all there. That one I made big is because that one was the one from the United States. That was ours. That was contributed to that. And the unique one about that is that mosaic is actually made of moon rock. Moon rock. Because that's what we were contributing. That's part of our culture, is that moon landing in 1969. And so they took moon rock and made that mosaic. Yes. Yeah. And so all the countries got to make their own of that mosaic, and they put it there in the church. So that one was indoors, and then a lot of others were outdoors, and it just depended on the size and where they could put it.
Any other question? Comment?
color exhibit at the beginning with the kids?
The colored exhibit. So right here in Houston, right down the highway here, right off of Kirby, it's the Color Factory. And so the kids got to go through all these different exhibitions with sights, smells and sounds, and talking about color and the importance of color. And that was fun for the kids because first of all, they got to try all these different experiments and different science. And then at the end, how the importance of how all colors are important. You can't appreciate one color, but you appreciate all the colors that God.
It's an interesting goal.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. It held me and Lindsay's attention. And there is a giant ball pit. So if you're really into ball pits, there's a huge one that's in there. And then at the end, they give you like a vegan toasted coconut ice cream. That was fascinating. It was black. So it scared Mara. She touched it and just goes, eh, and then she gobbled it down after she saw Asher eating halfway through. But that was, yeah, I appreciate you saying that, Beverly, because that was another important thing I got to do with the family, was seeing exhibits together with my family. So we got to go to the Houston Zoo and seeing the Galapagos, to go to the Natural Science Museum, where Asher got to rethink his love for sharks, because when he came across the megalodon, he was kind of like, oh, I don't know about this anymore. But he discovered still his passion for dinosaurs and being a paleontologist. And it also, so in the sabbatical also gave me an opportunity, as families know, to prepare for kindergarten. You never know those huge life milestones until you get there. And oh my gosh, I'd bawl like a baby when Asher held this like first day of kindergarten sign on the stairs and everything. And then Lindsay just kind of smiled and was like, okay, time to go. So yeah, so the sabbatical helped me prepare for that big, huge moment. So, I always get to pick on my previous Luther leaders. So Aramis, do you have any questions from this sabbatical? I know I can tell you, for example, like my favorite food in the Holy Land was falafel. It's never going to be the same here in the States. So what questions might you have?
All right, well, I saw a lot of selfies on your PowerPoint, so how many selfies did you take in this?
I took at least, if I'm going to give an estimate, 28. 28. And probably 20 of them are during the Holy Land, because yeah, I hate to admit this, but when you're a tourist and you're in the Holy Land, you do those touristy things, and that's the one big thing I did was like, oh. And then that's when I got in trouble in the Holy Scepter, was I was trying to do a selfie in the tomb. Oh yeah, no. So yeah, I did do a lot of selfies there. Yeah, go for it.
Thank you. It wasn't very good.
Correct.
So, it was very touristy, but you had those visions of origin, Bible, maybe. If you were on the touristy thing, you have to be supposed to be that Christianity is
dying.
and dying there. How did this all work in you?
So that is a very good question, because one of the things we got to do is meet with our Lutheran church that's there at the Holy Scepter. And then basically when you take a big trip like this, you ask, what do I do now? What, we've learned, we got to experience these things. What do we do now? And the pastor there kind of just said, you need to come back and share the stories and tell people to come here and experience the culture. Because it's one thing it's going on in the news of what's going on, but when you go to Israel and you see the Palestinian and the Israelites together, it's an eye-opening experience. I'll also say that so those sites are touristy because they are what's recognized as that's where they are. But it gives an appreciation to Jesus's ministry and what Jesus did, and Jesus walked amongst the people, ate with the people, Jesus did what was practical for the people. In which sometimes we as church leaders forget, we think that you read all of our emails all the time. And we think that you should be able to do this, and that for the church, but realizing that we're in this time now, and what is the reality of our faith in the church today? And also the importance of when we teach this to our young people, how do they get to experience the Holy? What would that look like if we got to bring young people to the Holy Land as we're teaching the scriptures and they get to see these sights? That's something we've kind of talked about as ministry staff, and as how we do that, and especially toying with the idea of maybe high schoolers going and with their parents or with their middle school students. But it's one thing when we teach these stories, but it's another place when you actually see the mountain where Jesus was tempted and where he fasted. It's one thing to actually walk the trail of doves where Jesus walked from Nazareth to Caesarea, and being on this trail that's really kind of the only trail that we got to experience without it being changed. You got to actually walk this trail that people believe is where Jesus actually walked, and you got to see what the landscape actually still looked like to the day where Jesus walked. And so that was kind of fascinating to see. And I tell you what, Jesus had some pretty tough feet, because that trail was not fun. Even as a 38-year-old, I was huffing and puffing and going down that trail and that mountain. But then we had some members that were 73 and were just passing me up like real fast. And so, but it's important for us to actually connect with our brothers and sisters of faith in that area and see how we continue to share their stories with others.
I'm wondering, were you a tour guide, or did you have any
Good question. I had to resist the urge. No, I was a participant. I got to just tag along. I got to be that kid that got to wander off while Pastor David's like, Ben, over here, we're going here now. I was actually known as the one shopping for souvenirs at every stop. And so Pastor David's like, where's Ben? And then I'm over here with like a coffee or a soda. I'm like, I'm coming. But yeah, no, I got to participate, which is Pastor David Hansen. Yeah. Spirit of Joy Lutheran in the Woods, in which I believe this will be he's actually taking a 4th trip he wants to take in January 2025. But yeah, he loves going there and taking groups there, and it's influenced his ministry so much that it's part of their ministry retreats and cycles for their members to experience that. Yeah, that was a gift for Sabbatical, where I just got to be the participant, not the one that's like cat herding, if you will. So I am looking at the clock. Is there any other questions? Yeah, because I don't want to.
You mentioned seeing the Israelis and Palestinians.
Oh, sorry. Say that one more time. We had someone wanting to hear you. Say it one more time.
You mentioned the Israelis and Palestinians. What did you observe? Did you see them together, or what did you observe in terms of the relationship?
I have to say it was very tense. So they don't have I didn't know who was Palestinian, who was Israelite, but it was very tense in the fact of like border checks. So an Israeli only gets to go through border checks, maybe 1 and 2, but a Palestinian has to go through like 5 or 6. So like, for example, like a family that lives in Bethlehem and they want to worship in the Holy Scepter, it will take them almost 2.5 hours to almost half the day to get to their church to worship on a Sunday morning, versus an Israeli gets to just go and make it. The biggest tense factor that I kind of felt is that the government in itself can enact when to shut water off to the Palestinians anytime that they need it, without giving them any warning. It's gut-wrenching thinking about that. Like if I'm cooking and then my water shuts off and the government says, sorry, we need it more. Yeah, so there's those tense feelings of that. And this trip, there is definitely, every place we went to is super safe. In fact, we were supposed to go to one site, but there was demonstrations and they decided for us not to go to there. And so, so visiting the Holy Land is a lot better and it's getting safer. And the nice thing about, at least with Elias Tours, is that it was led by a Christian Palestinian. So we got to really share his story. And there's positives depending on who your tour guide is, but it's fascinating hearing the stories that he had. And my gosh, his wealth of scripture and biblical knowledge is fantastic. And he was really eloquent in the way that how he picks out all these different sites around Jerusalem and tells us like this might be where they have this image of hell, and this is where the site is, and talking about that this was the image of hell because that's where all the trash they threw and burnt, and then that's when the biblical scholars got that idea of the fire and the things. We also went to Judean wilderness and got to see where Psalm 23, the valley of the shadow of death, and man, how deep it is there, and seeing that just chills down the spine.
Cool. Well, thank you, Deacon Ben.
Ben. The long hair always does it.
I know. We're so glad that you presented on your sabbatical, showing us the importance of why is it that ministers need to have sabbatical time once every several years. And so we hope that you all can join us next week when our youth with Deacon Ben here will be presenting on our first Global Connections presentation of the year, the youth's trip to Leipzig.
Yeah.
So we can hope you can join us here next week, same time, same place. God bless you all, and we'll see you in worship.
Great. Thank you all.